Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Highlanders by Gerry Davis, although he is credited with another writer, Iwan Jones, but Iwan Jones has actually no part in the actual writing of it. He just gets a credit in it for some reason. And directed by Hugh Davis. However, all 4 episodes are missing, with the only surviving clips that we have are the censored scenes that were taken out when the story was shipped to ABC, just like The Smugglers. So, yeah, it's one of those situations. And this 4-part story deals with just after the Battle of Clonton in 1746, I believe it is. Yeah. And it is also here that we're introduced to new companion, Jamie McCrinnan of the McCrinnans, played by the fantastic Fraser Hines. For those of you who don't know, Fraser Hines is an actor, of course, from Britain, and he made his film debut in a Charlie Chaplin film in the 60s, in the early 60s, and then he went on to play Jamie McCrinnan, and he was in EastEnders, I believe. And then he worked for Big Finish to not only voice Jamie McCrinnan, but to voice the second Doctor, as his Patrick Troughton impression is uncanny valley. It's unbelievable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Another thing to note as well, just like The Smugglers, this story doesn't have any music in it. It's clear that Ina Lloyd, who produced the series at the time, really wasn't a fan of pure historicals, and with stories like The Gunfighters and The Smugglers, he really wanted to phase out the pure historicals, and that is why this story is actually the last pure historical, as the viewing figures for this story were hit pretty bad by people's lack of interest of pure historicals. Now, I've already given my opinion that that is, at least the early pure historicals were some of the best that Doctor Who has to offer in terms of story-wise. But then later on, it did become clear that the writers weren't that interested in pure historicals. So, is this one an underrated gem, like I usually think they are, or does it deserve to be forgotten? Hit and miss. It's hit and miss. But let's get on to the actual story. The Doctor, Ben and Polly land in 1746, as I've stated before, and they get caught up with the Highlanders, and one of them is Jamie McCrinnan, and the other is, I believe it's his father? I can't remember, it's not very clear. He's like either it's like his boss or his father, and Jamie is a piper that's joined basically the Scottish army to take down the Redcoats, which is like the English army. And for those of you who don't know, the Battle of Culloden was the last civil war fought on British soil. It was the last battle between one British Empire and another British Empire. So, there you go. So that's an interesting fact. And so, the Doctor pretends to be a German scientist to try and work out to free the Scottish soldiers from the Redcoats as they get captured by them. And like anarchy ensues as Ben gets taken on a boat to be sent as a slave, which at that time was not okay, as the captain, I think his name was like Senator Grey, who is like the only actual historical figure in the story. He's the only one that's actually was a real person. Whilst Polly escapes and she befriends a Scottish girl, who I can't remember the name, and they basically have to free Ben and help the Doctor. So there's your story, basically. And yeah, there's no real main villain until the second half, when Grey becomes part of it. The story does a very good job at, though it is clear that the English are the bad guys and the Scottish are the good guys, it does do a good balance of making it like it's mainly the heads up that are doing all the bad guy stuff, and the soldiers are just sort of, might be a bit greedy, but they are people at the end of the day. So I think the story does a good job at expressing that. And the friendship that Jamie and Ben have going through the story really does work for both their characters, where they both like work off each other very well, and it's interesting to see this friendship slowly grow. Now, before I get into any more details, I just remembered that it's strange in this story, Ben and Polly's personalities seem to have swapped, especially right at the start, as when they leave the TARDIS, Ben thinks they're back home, but Polly is like, I'm not quite sure. So in this story, for some reason, Polly is the pessimist, and Ben is the optimist. So it does have a nice dynamic there, though it's a bit odd that it's not really like explained very well. They just sort of, it just seems like maybe the writer was writing the wrong character. But if you can get past that, it's actually a pretty enjoyable watch. Patrick Troughton is amazing as always. Here he plays quite a few caricatures. He plays the happy-go-lucky doctor, then he comes up, then he's like the scheming doctor later on. But before that, he plays the doctor in disguise as a German scientist, and it's very clever how he plays up and uses it to basically distract everyone. There's a great bit earlier on where he makes this guy paranoid with his eyes, and then he gets like a sheet and overpowers this one guy, and then when he locks him up, the doctor then gets interrupted by another guy, and he uses he pretends to be like a physician, looks at his eyes, it's like, oh, they look really bad, you need to rest them, wrap this thing around your eyes and count for an hour, and then you'll be fine. So you got that like really playful doctor in disguise, but that's not the only disguise he wears. Yes, this is the first story where you see the doctor dressed like a woman. But here he disguises himself as an old woman to hide away from the redcoats. And it is also here he bumps into Polly and her story. And so Patrick Troughton does get a lot of character moments in this story. And there's also something I've noticed as well, which I didn't mention in the last story, The Power of the Daleks. They seem to try and make the Doctor's catchphrase, I want a hat like that. Because in the last story, you see somebody with a hat, and he's like, I'd like a hat like that. And he does it twice in this story. Once when they see an abandoned cannon and they see a Scottish hat, and he put it on. And then he's like, I would like a hat like that. And then later on in the story, he sees somebody else with a hat. I can't remember who it was. The pictures don't make it very clear. I watched the loose cannon reconstruction of this, and it's not one of their best work. The audio is very quiet, but that might be because of the quality of audio that survived, and the pictures are very poor. So if you're going to watch the story, keep that in mind, that the reconstruction, the official loose cannon reconstruction is a bit weak, in my opinion. But I digress. And he points out to that guy that you'd like a hat like that. So there seems to be this running trend of this quirky doctor liking hats, similar to Matt Smith's 11th Doctor, way later on in the series. So I wonder if Stephen Moffat got the inspiration for that kind of catchphrase from the second Doctor. Who knows? But yeah. So Polly befriends this Scottish girl, and it starts off, and Polly seems really Jesus. Like, there's a few moments where this Scottish girl, I mean, remember, right, her basically family's been taken away by the Redcoats, and basically her family's been, and her friends with Jamie and all that have gone to prison, and she meets up with Polly later on, and most of the story she starts bursting out into tears, and Polly is just like, oh, stop crying. It's like, bloody hell, Paul. But luckily that's only in like the first episode and I believe like half of the second episode, so it doesn't become a great big deal. And later on, when this character starts toughening up, these two characters work really well and they're very interesting. So there's a lot of teaming up with Ben and Jamie and Polly and this girl teaming up, and the Doctor's sort of like, he does his own thing throughout most of the story, and he gets involved with the Redcoats and try to organise like the Highlanders' escape. The story does a great job at making these three plot lines interesting enough and doing the back to the ranch kind of storytelling. For those of you who don't know, back to the ranch is when you get like at least two or more storylines, and you make one storyline build up, and then when that's at its peak, you then cut to another story back at the ranch. That's where the title comes from, to another story, and then that build up, and you're just constantly doing that. A lot of stories do it. Star Wars, The New Hope does that. So I think the story does a very good job at this kind of storytelling. But the lack of a real good villain until maybe 3/4 into episode 3 really hinders the story, because you obviously you've got our Highlander characters banding up to defeat the Redcoats, but the Redcoats aren't that interesting for most of the story, and it does kind of hinder the story. But it's glad that we do have interesting Highlander characters to start off with, especially Jamie. He doesn't get a lot to do. It's not like he's like the main focus, but he is an interesting character, and like I said, with him and Ben, their dynamic is constantly changing as Jamie doesn't know whether to trust him, thinking he's an English spy, or to trust him as Ben's in prison with him, and Ben plans out all of these schemes to try and get them out there. So they really work really well, balance-wise. Ben doesn't have a lot of character in this one, though, like I said, with him and Jamie, their two stories work surprisingly well. And we get, and like the plot lines all intertwine. When the Doctor dresses up like a woman halfway through episode 2, it's really funny, and the girls kind of joke about it later on. At one point, Polly and that girl, they kidnap a redcoat who, if he finds out he was taken down by two girls, he would, his name would be in vain, so the girls basically use him to get around some like loose threads and stuff. So the story has a very female empowerment subplot in it. I mean, it's not exactly the best. They do kind of have the whole girls being girls, boys being boys, but the girls get a lot to do, and they take over a few times, and they help the Doctor with his plan on trying to free Ben. So Ben is basically the damsel in distress in this story, and Polly basically is the one who takes in charge. So it's really cool to see that. And then they free Ben and Jamie, and they basically take over the ship. And like I said, when they purported this story to the ABC, they cut out scenes which are funny enough the only surviving bits, and most of it is this battle at the end. Thankfully, it's not as graphic as anyone would imagine. Most of it's in the dark anyway, but it is nice to actually see it for a change. Yeah, and then later on, then Jamie takes the Doctor back to the TARDIS. Now, originally the shot was to be Jamie watches the TARDIS disappear and starts waving at them. However, when Inner Lloyd watched this story before broadcast, he met up with Fraser Hines and said, "Would you like a permanent companion role?" And so they went back to location to refilm the ending of the story, to have Jamie enter the TARDIS with Ben and Polly. So that's really cool. The Fraser Hines wasn't originally a companion, but he was so liked by the production that he was kept on. And thank God for it. Patrick Troughton and Fraser Hines would make a brilliant duo act in later stories. Here they hardly have scenes together, so you don't see that yet. Ben is mainly the one who has a bigger relationship with Jamie, and so you don't see that connection yet. But when we go later on in this series, we're going to see that the Doctor and Jamie are some of the best, play off each other and the best in the series. So there you go. And that's the Highlanders. It's a bit hit and miss. I think the story is interesting enough. Like I said, it does the whole back at the ranch very well. Each of the plot lines have their moments. But the weak antagonists until very at the last minute, and basically the first 3 episodes, unless apart from the drama, not much happens. There's no fighting and no real plot threads. It's mainly characters talking in rooms. So I can see why some people might not like this one and might give it a miss. Do I count it as essential? That's the big question. I don't think so. I think you could skip this if you want to. The only thing you're going to be missing that's really important is obviously Jamie's introduction. But it's clear that the show isn't interested in pure historicals anymore. Like I said, this is the last pure historical. There's no music, and from what we can gather by the pictures, the production looks really cheap. So I don't think, if this was found, I don't think it would come up as like a highly praised story. I would presume it would just kind of fly under the radar like it actually did. So there you go, there's the Highlanders. So join me next time where we go to Atlantis for the first time. Jamie has his first futuristic story, whether it's good or not. And we have to go into detail about the DVDs, unfortunately. So join me next time where we watch The Underwater Menace on the Doctor Who Marathon.